All right, thank you all for coming tonight. The first item on the agenda is normally to approve the minutes from the last meeting, but we're not actually going to be approving them until our next regular meeting. So we'll move right on to continuing the public hearing on the Parsons Village Comprehensive Permit. The first thing on our agenda is to hear from the city planner about the review that was done by the Barnes Aquifer Protection Advisory Committee.
So the proposal went before BAPEC on May 1st, and we received a letter May 9th from BAPEC. They had the following 5 recommendations for the project. One is that the roadways in the parking lot should be bermed so that all runoff from these surfaces are directed to the treatment BMPs and does not sheet flow into the open areas.
Now, do you know when they say berming, is that different from curbs?
It's a type of curb.
It's just a type of okay, because I think of berming as like dirt, but it's just a type of curb. Okay, thank you. I just wondered that when I read it.
Okay.
Sorry.
In BMPs, you know what that language, best management practices in regards to stormwater infiltration? Okay. All right, install a gate valve prior to the parking lot stormwater management facility so that in the event of release of hazardous material, the recharge BMP can be separated from the system to prevent the hazardous material from contaminating the groundwater. And operation of this gate valve should be described in the stormwater management system operation and maintenance plan. Ensure proper construction of the stormwater system and proper operations and maintenance by having a performance guarantee. And let's see, to ensure proper maintenance and operation, there should be annual submissions of the operation and maintenance reports to the appropriate authority in the city. In addition, the recording of the plan with the Registry of Deeds will ensure that the future owners of the property are aware of the responsibilities. And then finally, restrictions on both the use of sodium chloride for ice and snow removal and chemical herbicides and pesticides for lawn and garden care. So those were the 5 recommendations that came from BAPEC in regards to this development over the aquifer.
And in terms of which would be the appropriate authority within the city for the annual plan to be reported, that would be Public Works, I assume?
Yes.
And
they will be required to have a stormwater prevention plan?
There is one. A stormwater prevention plan?
Well, just
or an operation maintenance plan?
no, just like a stormwater. What is it?
Well, they're disturbing more than an acre, so they're triggering stormwater
Right.
permits anyway.
Right. Okay.
oh, that's what my question was. Can you how do you know how performance bonds, like, can you educate us all about that, or is that a question better directly to someone else?
It's complicated. Honestly, I'm getting myself up to speed on them as well. There's a lot of different guarantees or different sureties that they could do. I don't know what has been done in the past with CDC, but I think that's up for the discussion and negotiation if that's something that you're considering.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what they normally entail, other than presumably it's somebody promising that if things don't work out right, they'll pay to fix it.
It's through an insurance company. The
Yeah, but it's a
bonds
bond.
themselves
Right.
are through insurance
Right.
companies. There's other ways that you can have financial guarantees. There could be escrow accounts, there could be letters of credit, there could be other ways. It doesn't have to be a bond, but there should,
Right, it would be money paid in to, I guess I'm wondering, the performance guarantee, like how long would money need to be like, I'm just wondering what BAPEC is recommending, like how long money would normally be held, and
Well, with normal developments in the city, we usually hold on to them until there's the final construction of the road. We usually do them with subdivision plans. So once the subdivision road is in, the stormwater is in, the water, the sewer, landscaping, then we release the bond back to the developer.
So
Once
basically
everything's built in
tested.
place and inspected by city officials to make sure that it's working properly, then we'll release the bond or whatever the guarantee is. So,
This shouldn't fall under the same auspice of that then, because this is going to be maintained by private ownership.
But
This
it's not a
one-
bond for the maintenance, they're recommending a bond for the construction. The performance guarantee is to
It
make
also
su-
says proper
Yeah.
operations
Oh.
and maintenance, so I'm not sure how that would work.
Well, and it
And
should
that's a
help
good
in
question.
regard to, for the near future, and near is relative, but,
Mhm.
but, you know, the fact that the ownership has deemed that they're going to maintain the stormwater retention basin, whether it above ground or below ground, you know, the city, I think, should have some sort of performance guarantee that this is gonna happen, other than,
Mhm.
you know, requiring DP to come in and say, well, you haven't taken care of it.
Mhm. Mhm. I can, I'll check with city engineer and DPW about this. I actually forwarded this letter to them and I haven't heard back yet.
Okay.
So let me get an opinion on how they would want to function that, and then I can get back to you.
Okay.
Okay?
Do you have any experience, like from either subdivision, or not, of whether, it's very common for like stormwater management plans to get recorded with deeds?
It's another good question. I don't know. I can check into that.
Just curious. Anybody else understand? Is there anything that you guys would like to respond to in this, or just make a? Yeah, please.
comment. Joy Campbell, Valley CDC. So we have just gotten the letter yesterday as
Right.
well, so we, the development team and our property manager, we wanna take a look at it, and we will get back to you with responses and our suggestions, or how we think we would deal with the particular items that were recommended.
Okay.
Thanks. Alright, and we have, Juliet.
So do you want to just make note of the other two letters that,
Oh,
that also,
um,
or the other letter that came in from Historical Commission? And I can also report on, I spoke with the fire chief and the building inspector. I think that was on the agenda. Was I listed as reporting back on that?
Yes, that is, yes, sorry.
Okay,
yeah.
all right. So there was a letter submitted by the Historical Commission regarding the development, and it's pretty similar to what they submitted under the special permit application. Essentially, it's about the cemetery and having a buffer against the cemetery. And then there was also this fact sheet that was submitted, what to do when human burials are accidentally uncovered. So in case there's something like that happened during the development process, that the proper procedure would occur with that.
And that's a state law, I mean, you guys are familiar with that.
So I spoke with the fire chief. He didn't submit anything in writing, but I did have a verbal conversation with him twice. So he wanted to just say that he has no safety concerns with the development at this time. And I had a conversation with the building inspector as well, and he had the same response. He has no concerns with the development as proposed at this time. Okay? And you I also wanted to note that you also have a submission from CDC regarding the property maintenance and management, which we requested at your last meeting.
Right, yeah.
So the folks at home know.
And everything that has been submitted to us is available to anybody who wants it by contacting the city clerk. You said the fire chief did, I'm sorry, did you also talk
He had
to
no
Joe? Joe had nothing.
Joe, the building inspector? He had no concern.
Okay. So now, traffic study, I assume that's you.
Yes, you ready for me?
I think so, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, members of the board. My name is Juliet Law. I am a professional engineer in the state of Massachusetts, as well as a professional traffic operations engineer. I work for Van Assing and Breslin in Springfield, Massachusetts. I've been there for over 8 years. We were retained by the city of Easthampton to provide a peer review of the application. Me in particular did a traffic and circulation review of the application. As part of that, we reviewed the site plans, which were dated November 2011, and the traffic impact report that was prepared and was dated December 2010. When we conduct a peer review, we typically like to conduct it in accordance with not only the local zoning regulations, but also just industry standards. So we did prepare a memo, excuse me, that was submitted to the city, and I believe everyone has gotten a chance to look at it, but I will go through the comments fairly quickly.
I don't have a hard copy, but I have.
Did everybody
Barbara
receive a
sent it,
copy?
yeah.
Did Barbara send it to you?
Yeah,
She
Barbara
did,
sent
okay,
it, yeah.
all right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to
Great,
make sure.
no, that's excellent. And the comments were minor, but I will go through them, you know, one at a time so we can be clear on what was found. We did do a very, you know, thorough review of the report that was prepared, the appendix material that was attached, and the site layout for circulation and pedestrian patterns. The first comment we made was regarding the study area that was analyzed, which consisted of 2 intersections adjacent to the proposed site, which is Ferry Street at Parsons Street and Parsons Street at James Lane and Everett Street. We found that to be a very adequate study area given the nature of the development. And as well as the traffic counts that were conducted for both the AM and PM peak hours is typical for a commuter type development, such as vehicles leaving in the morning to go to work, come home at night, since this is a residential development. The second comment we made was that the land use codes that were used from the Institute of Transportation Engineers, again, we found to be correct and consistent with industry standards. The Institute of Transportation Engineers maintains a database of hundreds of land use codes ranging, you know, anywhere from a residential to a retail type development, office space. I think there's one even there for, like, you know, a tire sales store. So they have quite a wide range and quite a database that is kept. And in particular, land use code 220 is for apartment building. So we found it to be very adequate. And of course, you, with that information into the database, you plug in the number of units that you're proposing, which is 38 in this case, and it in turn spits back to you the anticipated number of AM peak period traffic that it would generate by the site, PM peak period trips generated by the site, and it'll also give you based on a daily basis for an average weekday and an average Saturday. And the numbers they gave back did come out to be consistent: 19 vehicles in the AM peak hour, 24 in the PM, and about 254 during a typical weekday. And what's nice about analyzing the, you know, the worst, we call it worst case, AM and PM peak hours, is that's where if you were to measure the traffic volumes on an adjacent roadway, you'll see that it peaks, you know, during those commuter peak hours, the AM and PM. So when you analyze those peak hours, you are getting your worst case for the roadway. And that is what the applicant had done. The next comment, just minor, something we saw, there was a reference to Beach Street. I'm assuming that it was supposed to be reference to Parsons Street. The following comment indicates that a growth rate of 1% per year was utilized to forecast the existing traffic volumes. It's very standard with the traffic study where you go out and you collect the data, which I just indicated during the peak hours, and on the adjacent roadways. And then you need to project how those streets are going to operate in the future. So what you do is you use a background growth rate to literally grow those traffic volumes, because unfortunately everything grows, and, you know, the roadways are only going to get busier. So 1% per year was used, which is very, and I think it's actually fairly conservative. Over the past 5 years, we've actually been noticing in this region, you know, maybe 0.5% per year. So they did look at a conservative analysis to give you guys, you know, what's the worst case? How are these roadways really going to be operating? The next comment, which is on the second page of the memo, a little confusing, but I do want to try to explain it, because I'm not exactly sure why the applicant did it this way. But for a typical traffic study, you go out and you collect what we call existing traffic volumes. And then, as I just explained, you grow them out a certain number of years. Typically, we look at a 5-year projection to see, okay, what would this roadway do 5 years from now if the development were not in place? And we call that a no-build scenario. So what we looked at when they conducted the counts, it was in the year 2010. So they looked at a 2010 existing conditions, and grow it out to the year 2015 to get a 2015 no build conditions. And then on top of that, we add the numbers that generated from our database based on the land use code for apartment building. You add that on, and it's called a 2015 build conditions. And that's typically how a traffic study is formatted. The applicant, we didn't really understand why, but they did provide a 2010 no build, which is essentially existing, as the traffic numbers weren't forecasted. They provided a 2010 build, which this is the one that they provided it. Did they have to? No. Does it mean anything? No. Obviously, the complex wasn't built in 2010, so adding those volumes onto 2010 roadway volumes really don't tell you anything. But they also did look at a 2015 no build and a 2015 build, so those were adequate. So what you got was, a little bit extra. Not sure why we need to know what it does in 2010, since that's obviously in the past and the complex is not constructed yet. So the following comment was that the traffic impact study does not indicate what the anticipated trip distribution will be for the proposed development. When you generate the traffic based on the land use code, as I indicated, it was 19 trips in the AM peak hour, 24 in the PM peak hour. So you have those 19 trips in the AM peak hour. They come out the site driveway. Where do they go from there? That's what the trip distribution is called. And because obviously all 19 of those trips may not go to Ferry Street. All 19 of those trips may not go down to Everett. What they're going to do is they're going to split, and that's called a trip distribution. And while it wasn't exactly explained in the report, I did do a review of the appendix material where they provided some traffic network figures. And they did do like a 50-50 split, which we found to be adequate, but just wanted to point out that it was not provided in the report. A lot of times, the common person who read the report might not understand, okay, how are these trips, getting to the highway, where are they going? So that was just a comment we made, but in analyzing the appendix material, the trip distribution they used was adequate, and we feel that they've, evenly spread to reflect how each roadway would be impacted. And not the last comment, the second to last comment, they did provide an analysis of the study area intersections, and I didn't say this in the beginning, but it's very typical of a residential development not to be a very high traffic generator. You think of something like a retail complex or a fast food restaurant. Those will generate hundreds and hundreds of trips during the peak hours. And a residential development just isn't going to have that type of impact, especially only 38 units. So the level of service is not expected to change at any of the study area intersections, and it's not expected to have a negative impact, and we do agree with that analysis. And the last comment we made, and this is the one, we provided a general overview of the report. We wanted to provide a thorough review and provide all these comments just so you knew you were getting, a satisfactory report from the applicant. And this is the only one we really called out as we would really like to see this incorporated into the plans. It's something that should be provided. As a matter of fact, it comes straight from the City of Easthampton zoning ordinance, indicating that the proposed plan shall maximize the convenience and safety of vehicular and pedestrian movement within the site and in relation to adjacent travelways. One way we think that we're lacking in this requirement by your zoning ordinance is there are no stop signs or crosswalk signs proposed or provided throughout the development, not that we could see on the plans. So we do believe that you're going to have the complex is laid out nice, where you're kind of you're encouraging pedestrians to walk around, visit the community building, visit the garden areas. So we really want to make sure that if pedestrians are going to be going from their apartments and through parked cars, we want to make sure it's safe, and some signage would be helpful to that. So it's really the only comment we had that we saw, this should really be incorporated. But in general, the traffic impact study and the traffic impact report that was prepared was adequate, and we found to be consistent with industry standards.
Thank you.
If you do have any questions, I will certainly answer them, but.
Do we got any questions? think we're, do you have any questions, Jen? No?
Okay, I won't go anywhere, so if you come up with any.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, what I'm gonna do, I see hands. What we're gonna do is we're gonna let Valley CDC, just in keeping with the agenda, let Valley CDC give us a response if they want, and then neighbors can respond. And if you have questions, you can ask your questions during the neighbor response time. And the neighbor response time is specifically about the traffic study. So.
Yeah, I'm Mark Darnold from Berkshire Design. I'm the professional engineer who prepared the traffic report. And I concur with the review, very nice review, thank you. Just wanted to clarify a couple of things. One was the 2010 build condition. Sometimes we do throw that in just for clarification, and sometimes the public likes to understand if the complex were built today, what would the traffic be like if they had instantaneously be there. So it is an extra piece of data, not typically included with a traffic report. And then the last comment, we had concerns that was raised regarding pedestrian signage around the crosswalks, et cetera. We totally concur with that statement as well. Just wanted to clarify with the zoning board that what you have before you are permitting plans, and they're not complete CD plans, construction document plans. We don't have the signs designated on the plans for what the handicap parking is, for the crosswalks. And we think it's a very valid comment. We would definitely intend to follow through with that on the final construction documents.
Juliet, can you tell us where you would like to see signs? I know it's
Yeah,
going to be.
I don't have a site plan in front of me.
Yeah, that's what I was just.
I
Do you
think
guys-
there's a number of
do you have the
crosswalks
board?
throughout the development. And we would just like to see one on each approach to the crosswalk.
Okay.
Each crosswalk, just your standard crosswalks, I mean, those are, fairly, they're regulated by NUTCD, so you can't really stray far from
Okay.
what's typically required. And as well as, thank you. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 crosswalks. So that would be a number, total of 10 crosswalk signs. If you figure one from
Right, and we're just
from each side.
the stop signs for the cars on either side. Okay.
Yeah, and
I just
then,
want to make sure that.
I think this is really the only area I had some concern where we might want to provide a stop sign coming out of this small parking area here. Just as with the curve here with pedestrians, on both sides of these and some trees maybe providing blocking a little bit of sight distance, I think a stop sign would really help just coming out of this one area. And then of course exiting out of the development onto Parsons Street, I'm sorry. But other than that, I think the site circulation works really well. I think having this turnaround area helps at the rear of the development. So if someone is, pointed in the wrong direction, they can just, make a quick turnaround there as opposed to trying to pull a 5-point turn, in between 2 stalls of parking.
Okay. Any, if you could come, if folks who want to respond about the traffic study can come to the podium and say your name.
Are we limited to traffic?
Yes, we
For
are
the
limited to
entire
traffic.
evening?
Traffic. There is a point at the end where 2 meetings ago, I think it was, I had asked folks who were commenting if there were positive changes that they felt would make this development work better for them, that we would be interested in hearing that, and there is time for that at the end. But other than that, it's just traffic. So, and right now it's just traffic.
Okay.
So my question is, did you do your own base data, or are you just relying on Berkshire's data?
We, should I stand up to answer,
Yeah.
or the board?
I don't know how the,
Yeah.
I don't know what the, I think that if the cameras, I don't know. Yeah, if you could stand up, that would probably be
Not a problem.
good.
We did not conduct our own data. What we did is we examined the data that the applicant conducted. And the applicant did, I actually have their study right here in their attachment. They used a local count vendor, Innovative Data. They're based out of Belchertown, Massachusetts. Vanessa and Breslin actually uses them as a count vendor all the time. So so they don't actually go out and conduct the counts themselves. It is provided by a third-party count vendor that they hire. And what they use is they conducted an ATR, which is called an automated traffic recorder, which is essentially a roadway tube. You probably recall driving over them on the roadways, and what it does is it counts the number of vehicles that go over that, and that is conducted for usually a 24 to 48 hour period, so you can get a full day's worth of data. The TMCs that are conducted, which is a turning movement count, and that's done at an intersection, and the two intersections I described, those were done during the AM and PM peak hours, and those are done by physical people that will sit there, and they'll typically use a count board.
And you have that, that's the data you worked on?
And that's the data that is given to us through the traffic study. So we didn't conduct our own data, but we did review their data and found it to be consistent with, historic data from the area and
And
what
their
we would
data
expect.
was done by a reputable?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
you're welcome.
Thank you both. You can just come on up. And just make sure to say your name and your address for the record.
Roger Paris, 21 Pevin Ave. Did you actually visit the street and spend time on the street?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
You can exercise
I
tonight.
did. This is good for me, in my growing state here. Yes, we did. I didn't mention it, but it is called out in our report that we provided. Wednesday, April 11th, I was at the site, looked at the roadway, and granted, I was there. I believe it was around 3 p.m. So right before the PM peak hour, to get and I don't live in Easthampton, but I'm from the area. I'm very familiar with the area. But again, I wasn't, and I travel along Ferry Street quite often, but I had never really been on Parsons Avenue. So I did visit the site and the intersections, and what we usually do is we sit there for a few minutes and we just observe how the traffic operates. Are they driving fast? What is going on at these intersections? Are they stopping at the stop signs? Are they rolling through the stop signs? It gets a little more interesting when we have a study area with, a signalized intersection, of course. But yeah, we were at the site on a Wednesday, and we did, observe the characteristics of the intersections and found them to be consistent with what the applicant described in their traffic report.
Yeah. Did you see any problem with the Ferry Street, Parsons Street intersection?
I didn't notice any problems.
Okay, because I think the mayor, when he was here at the planning board meeting, referenced the problem with the Ferry Street, Parsons Street intersection, which is that because of the fence, which is on Ferry Street,
A little bit of a
people
sight
leaving
distance.
Parsons can't see, and that had to do with funding for rebuilding the intersection, and it was poorly done. So you didn't see a problem.
We didn't see a major problem, not with the traffic volumes that are carried on those streets. Unfortunately, sight distance, and especially as it relates to private property, it can be an issue. When there's not a lot of city right of way, and when private property owners do have fences or trees or really tall shrubs close to the roadway, it can become difficult. But unfortunately, you can't regulate every case. And in this case, I know as personal as it can be to people who live in the area and travel those streets all the time, it wasn't a huge operational flag for us when we did our review.
Okay. Did you notice any deficiencies at the Princeton Avenue, Parsons Street intersection?
You may have to help me out with where Princeton Avenue is.
Okay. If I leave my home and I drive out Princeton Avenue, if I don't stop, I run into the old Parsons Street School.
Okay.
That's probably the easiest way to tell you where it is. It's on Parsons Street. If
So
you're going
it's
from
further
Ferry
south of
towards
the
Everett.
site? Yeah.
and- right, exactly. And when I left to come to this meeting, there's parking on both sides of that street. You cannot see the traffic coming on that street until you're in that intersection. You literally have to stick your the hood of your car out in front of oncoming cars. Right?
Because of the
you
on-street
can't-
parking?
Right, okay. I find it kind of amazing that we have two traffic studies, neither of them reference these problems with these
Well,
intersections.
I think part of that, though, is that I mean, I don't know, you can maybe answer this better, but I know that from like what the kind of conditions that, for example, in the comprehensive permit process that we would be allowed to impose, can't fix already existing, like they can't address already existing problems.
But increasing the traffic on the street has an impact on the problems.
Well,
So
but it
shouldn't
doesn't
the problems
create.
be referenced in the traffic study?
I'll let Juliet explain how that works, but I know that like if there's an existing problem, like to the extent that it is worsened and there's a way to like ameliorate the worsening, we can address the worsening, but we can't address
Yeah.
the initial problem because it's
And
already there and it shouldn't be
she-
Valley CDC's problem.
She did explain it very well. You know, if it's an existing problem, a lot of times on-street parking is found to be necessary in previous studies that were done, and that's why it's there. Of course, there's supposed to be a regulated distance, and I think it's 15 to 25 feet where parking cannot occur near a side street or a side street with a stop sign. So there should not be parking in that zone, so people are able to, you know, pull out safely to be able to see. And again, as long as the existing situation is not being propagated, made worse by the development. In this case, the amount of trips being generated by this development is very minor. And no, I don't think we would be propagating an existing problem. And I apologize because I'm still not familiar with where Princeton Street is. It's further south of Everett.
No, it's north, it'd be north of Everett.
Oh,
Going
it's
towards
that one right
Ferry
there,
Street.
okay.
Right, so
Yes,
side street
yes, yes.
comes out on Parsons
Yes,
Street
I
opposite
did
the
walk
school.
right through that one.
Okay.
Okay, and yeah, you know, the time I was there, I didn't see it to be a problem with on-street parking.
Did you see a lot of bus traffic?
Not while I was out there.
Okay. There's a bus lot right down the street from that intersection, between where Pepin comes out and where Parsons comes out. In the morning, there's a lot of traffic from those buses at that particular intersection. I assume that's true in the afternoon, although it may be more staggered. I don't know. Do we know if that bus traffic was incorporated into the traffic numbers?
The counts were conducted, they listed the dates here. They were conducted midweek in October, so school would have been in session. We typically don't like traffic counts that are going to be used in traffic studies to be conducted, you know, either during a school vacation week or during the summer, because you get less traffic, more people stay home, more people go on vacation. The school buses are not operating. You definitely want to make sure they're in session, and the traffic counts that were done would have conducted and counted not only every vehicle that went through the intersections, but also every pedestrian or every bicyclist. And the counts do separate by type. What they do is they separate out heavy vehicles from the cars and the truck traffic. I'm sorry, heavy vehicles and like a tractor trailer type truck from your everyday commuter vehicle. And that is separated out in the traffic counts. So, you know, if there was anything out of the ordinary, I mean, it would have been reflected, but we are seeing some numbers in here for they have these HVs and buses right here. So they are counted, they are included, and
Are you aware that there's a paving plant down the street?
You know what, I think this is where, like, what is existing right now in terms of traffic problems is beyond the purview of our board and the conditions that we can impose. And I don't know how to explain it any better, but it would only be an incremental worsening that could matter. And the engineer has already explained that the volumes, while they might feel significant to people living in the neighborhood, from the perspective of the engineers, it's not actually significant. So there isn't that incremental significance. Is that a correct summary?
correct.
Okay.
Okay. So I don't want to get off the topic, and you know, so if you have another comment, that would be great. But I think, you know, Juliet's more than sort of addressed the scope of the review that she was able to do, and it doesn't really get down to whether there's problem intersections there, that's really more something to take up with your city councilor or the mayor, separate from this.
My comments are to whether the traffic study is reliable. Okay, given
Well,
the conditions
but I don't think
in the
that the
neighborhood.
questions that you're, well, but what I'm just trying to explain is that's not what the traffic study looks at. So, because we can't consider those issues. Like, we can't consider whether there's an existing problem with where the cars are parked, because that's, like, all we can consider is whether the development would make it worse. And that is based on the volume of traffic, not the existing conditions. And we've got our professional engineer telling us sort of how, in the industry, how this is viewed. And so I appreciate that there are, I mean, my son used to go to daycare over on Ferry Street, so I know how frustrating it can be to turn onto Ferry Street from Parsons. And I hate that intersection too, but it's not something that we're allowed to, that's not something that we're allowed to consider.
Okay, good. Just make
So.
2 quick comments,
Sure.
and then I'll sit down.
Take
and
your,
evaluate.
yes,
Okay.
two quick comments
Okay.
and then sit down.
One is, I think the reliability of the information we're given, whether it's incremental or not, any change, there would be increase. So the reliability of the information we're given is, in my view, important. Okay. And secondly, I question the assumptions made about the incremental nature of the increase. This is affordable housing. It's not over 55, it's not retirement housing. Presumably there will be young families, there are 2 and 3 or 2 and 3 unit apartments. Presumably people are going to be going to work, and maybe at a higher rate than is average, one would hope. And so, you know, again, that.
So then I guess the question for that though wouldn't be so much about like things about the intersection, but maybe Juliet could tell us a little bit more about how the numbers that are in that database that were used
Yeah,
are generated,
I can
like what those
absolutely
reflect.
give you a little bit more background, which might help you understand. As I explained, it's called ITE, which is the nationally known Institute of Transportation Engineers, and they maintain a database called the Trip Generation Database, and they collect data at thousands of sites all over the country for each particular land use. If they were conducting studies at like a retail complex or like a supermarket, they would literally sit at the driveways and they would count the number of vehicles coming in and out during the peak hours, and they would compare that to the square footage of the building. So then they can get what they call a trip rate based on every 1,000 square feet per building. So if it's 50,000 square feet, you multiply 50 by that rate. For a apartment complex, they don't base it on square footage, they base it on the number of units, which makes perfect sense because you typically per unit you have an average number of people living there. And what we like to look at, because we don't just open this book and do the calculations and put numbers on a piece of paper, we really want to make sure it makes sense. And what we found, the daily, so on an average weekday, we are seeing, I think it was 250, all around 250 vehicles entering and exiting that site, which is basically saying that, and that's total. So half of them are going to enter, half of them are going to come back. Basically, you assume everyone's going to come back the same day. So 250, that's 125 exiting throughout the day and 125 coming back. For a 38-unit apartment complex, and for the purposes of rounding off the top of my head, that's about 3 vehicles leaving per apartment every day and 3 vehicles coming back. I can tell you, I'm a young family. I've already got 2 kids at home now. And my husband and I, we each leave in the morning and we each come back at night. It's very, very seldom that we make that 3rd trip. So I do think this is a conservative analysis. And I do think it accurately represents the number of units that are going to be proposed in that complex. And I know it's hard for me as a peer reviewer to stand up and really back this, like that's not my job. Like I haven't been hired by the applicant. I've been hired by the city to conduct a peer review. So we really look at this objectively, and we really looked at it in the interest of the city and in the interest of the neighbors. And what we focus on is the study area that we're given. And if I had thought the study area was out of line, if they had only focused on, the intersection of Everett at James and Parsons, I would have raised a red flag. Like, we need to look at Ferry and Ferry Street and Parsons and just make sure it's really operating okay. And at the end of the day, the levels of service that we're seeing at these intersections, and again, I didn't get into a lot of depth because I'm just the peer reviewer. I don't know if there was ever a traffic presentation given to the crowd and to the board, but the levels of service it's very similar to a report card that you would get in school. You know, an intersection, both signalized and stop controlled, can operate from a level of service A, which would be your best case, to a level of service F, which is the worst case. And what we're seeing here is levels of service B and C, which is good. You know, you're seeing a little bit of, like you said, it might be difficult to turn onto Ferry Street at times, you know, during the peak hours, but overall the vehicles are not experiencing a lot of delay. And that's what they look at from a traffic study, and that's how they gauge how the intersections are really operating. So we did, I mean, we're on behalf of the city. We're not, we're supporting the city. We want to give them the information.
Is seasonality accounted for?
Seasonality is always accounted for in these reports. I don't think it was defined inside this one, but what you can do if you were to conduct counts on a really low period, and really the only periods that raise flags are like the months of January, February, and July and August. Those tend to be, you know, not that July and August are low, they just tend to be weird. Because a lot of people are going out. You know, a lot of people will do day trips. They won't go out to work in the morning, but they'll leave at, you know, 10 or 11 instead to go to the park. Those just tend to be a little bit weird. January and February tend to be low. So a lot of times you would, if counts were conducted during those months, you would want to apply a rate that would bump them up to the average time of the year. But as far as counts go in October, we really have no concern with those. You know, there's no interference with, well, I guess we can't speak for the year 2011 because we did have that major snowstorm. But you know, in October you don't usually see a major snowstorm event or something that would impact the traffic counts that are conducted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
I have a question,
Of course.
and you keep referencing back to the database that you used, and you used the apartment classification for this. And I guess maybe it's just a thought process of an apartment being in a city where people wouldn't have cars, possibly. Is there a townhouse classification? Is there a condominium classification or something else along those lines, garden apartment type classification, where it's not the apartment, possibly high-rise city type dwelling, where people are going to have more cars, which may affect the traffic differently?
We have, you know, in having done a lot of work with the ITE, you do pose questions about their databases. And one thing they won't do is go into a major city and conduct a count and use it in with their average where they know that no one owns a car. Because that's the purpose of this database, is to estimate the number of vehicle trips. But as far as other land use codes, you're right on target. There are actually very many other land use codes that relate to residential use. Anywhere from single unit houses, which would be like a you know, like a residential development where each house has its own lot. There are high-rise apartments, there's low-rise apartments, I believe there are townhouse and condominium is one land use code together. And all of those exist, and they can certainly, you know, you can make whatever argument to apply it to this situation. But at the end of the day, from doing so many of these and being familiar with the database, Land Use Code 220 apartment building is the one that provides the most data. They've done more studies for that one because it's a little more general, as opposed to the other ones that are a little more specific. And even at the end of the day, you're not seeing rates that are very far off. You know,
So you're not going to see,
you're not going to see a you know, tripling of the amount of traffic.
Okay. I'm trying to, you know,
no,
make sure
I'm
that we're
glad
looking
you
at the right
asked.
numbers.
Absolutely. I mean, there are other land use codes out there, but they don't have, each land use code, based on its, you know, popularity with developments, will have a number of studies that it's based on. It actually tells you how many sites the ITE went out and counted for each land use code. Like I was describing, you know, retail, grocery stores. Those are popular ones that we use in our industry all the time, you know, for the developments that go on in the area. And those have a significant amount of data points. They've done so many counts at studies like that. You know, but if you look at something less popular, like I threw out tire store, you know, that will maybe be based on like 3 different counts throughout the country. So you've got 3 data points, and it's like, all right, is this really reliable? And that's kind of the comparison that you get. For as far as apartments go, they use the right code.
Okay.
It's the one that provides the most data, and even if they were to use something else, we have seen a plus or minus increase during the peak hours. It's possible, but it's certainly not significant enough that it would impact the study.
There were other hands originally, so I just want to make sure that if anybody else has traffic comments. I wonder.
I'm just gonna.
Yeah. You can just sit at the end of our table if you'd like. I mean, you're on our behalf, so have a seat there.
No problem.
And you can. I trust you guys to sort out your order. There was somebody in the back though, so if. Yeah, that's why I didn't think he saw because she was behind him.
Amy Heflin, 10 Pepin Avenue. The area regarding traffic that Roger Paris just mentioned, the intersection of Parsons Street and Princeton, that is the Holmes Dance Studio. There are dance classes and all sorts of classes for kids. That starts at age 3 up. It's pretty active. I have to say, living in the neighborhood on Pepin, as Roger does, when you pull out, as I did tonight, to come here, you absolutely have to pull your car out into traffic.
Right, again,
can I just say, ma'am, please? I know that we're not addressing existing problems, but I really have a hard time believing that if we're going to add 38 units, we are not going to exacerbate a situation that's already there with children. Children are getting in and out of cars there all the time. There's a crosswalk there that no one stops for. So I don't know if the city has considered some sort of investment for like a humped part of the street there to slow people down. I walk my dog on Parsons pretty much every day, sometimes morning and night. And I really think we're kidding ourselves if we say that 38 more units with XYZ people living there with how many cars, we're not going to add to that already delicate situation there at the Holmes Dance Studio. Also, and not a problem of the cities, at
no,
Parsons.
I think these are problems of the cities.
Well, no, I realize that, but I'm just saying at Parsons and Ferry, if you will allow, last year, planning board member Ann Perizzo said, she said it twice publicly, she said she feels she takes her life into her hands to get out far enough to see, okay, now there's a wall there that the mayor was asked about point blank, and it was discussed openly that the wall had to be moved. And planning board members and the mayor said, we're not getting into a land taking. So there is a situation that's existing there that however many more trips, whether you want to call it lower incrementally or upper incrementally, that absolutely is going to affect that area and the safety and safety concerns in that area. And I have one other question regarding real traffic. Maybe I missed it or I wasn't listening, but when I walk down there, I'm always confused about if you live on Duda Drive and you pull out, there's also James Street there. So they pretty much meet at the end. And if you were taking a right from Duda, someone was taking a left onto Parsons from James, and also right in front of that mouth is Everett. Now within 40 yards of that situation, we're gonna have a curb cut for this housing project. I mean, it seems to me that it's gonna be within 40 yards. And then within 25 yards of that, you have the curb cut for Easthampton Tool. So I don't know, did I miss in the presentation about cars pulling out, opposing each other? I mean, I work in Northampton every day on Pleasant Street, and it's very tricky, all these different curb cuts pulling out against each other, and I've almost been hit twice. So I don't know, again, I've walked my dog down there and thought, how is a curb cut right here, someone taking a left twice a morning and people coming out of James or Duda? I don't know how that's gonna all flow or be safe. So, that's it on my questions for traffic, yeah.
I think, I mean, in looking at the map, I think that the curb cut or the entrance into this development is directly across from Easthampton Tool.
Yeah.
Okay, like straight in line.
Is it straight directly across?
It
I mean,
doesn't-
It's pretty close.
I mean, it's pretty
Pretty
close.
close.
I mean, but it's not
Close
25
enough.
yards
it's
down the
just like a few step jog. I mean, you're pretty much
yeah,
right there.
but not 25 yards.
Not 25 yards. I haven't measured it.
Yeah.
But again, I've walked
I
down
mean,
there.
because when we
Yes.
went to the site, it was pretty well, you know, okay, if you're in Easthampton Tool, you know, basically pretty much straight across the street. I mean, it may be off 2 or 3 feet or, you know, 5 feet one way or the other, but it's going to be pretty well lined up. You know, and that's, you know, that's a way, not a ways, but it's a distance down from that intersection of Everett and Parsons. So, but I appreciate, and I want to speak to everybody's concerns about the intersection of I'm trying to remember the name of the street there. Everett, not Everett.
Parsons and Ferry.
No, not Parsons and Ferry. But
No, Everett, Duda, James.
Princeton.
Spilling out. Oh, Princeton and
Okay.
Parsons, yes.
I appreciate everyone's concerns, and I think the best avenue for approach for an existing situation is to voice your concerns with the city engineer. Because the city engineer is going to be able to determine whether additional setback is going to be required for parking, or what needs to happen to be able to provide clear sight lines for that intersection. And if it's an existing problem today, we're not questioning that it's going to get worse, or it's going to change. And I don't want to say worse, but it's going to change should this be approved. But let's address it for what it is with the city engineer. And the same thing with the intersection with Ferry Street and Parsons Street.
Right.
Okay? And I understand frustration where the planning board and the city and the mayor didn't want to hear your concerns. But if it's addressed with the city engineer, he will be able to make a determination whether it is a direct safety concern and be able to move forward on it.
Okay, I also, Margaret, if I could, was there not time for sewer? We've had so much discussion about water.
I had time for that at the.
We did I
Previous meeting.
Yeah.
miss that? It was a meeting or two ago. Not water, not Barnes Aquifer, not water supply, not water stuff, specifically sewer stuff. No?
The last meeting was like wastewater, water
Oh.
generally, like, if I wasn't clear, I mean, any.
Runoff.
Runoff.
It was runoff.
It was-
or
Not
wa-
sewer line stuff.
Oh,
Sewer. Sewer line is what I'm talking about.
no, I mean, I would have been happy to hear that at the last meeting. I mean, I would have
Okay.
sort of lumped all of that
No, I
together,
just
but-
asked, I was kind of
but,
waiting, and it was never like, now's the time for XYZ.
Yeah.
And also, I want to say, a couple meetings ago, you said other people would have a chance to speak, and I just have to say, I don't think every single person who's wanted to speak and had their points, because it was like, oh, next meeting you'll get to speak. I just think it fair's fair. The applicant has had time to say what they need to say, and if we could just consider that, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I have points I'm not gonna make. I didn't have time, and I just
Yeah, I
have
just
something
want
I'd
to.
like
I just want to see where the time
Okay.
time is, because of course the peer reviews. You know, we've had
Yeah.
one at the last two meetings, and they
Thanks.
do take up time. Thank you.
I don't have enough copies for everyone, I apologize.
I have I don't know how appropriate it is for me to make a comment or a question, but regarding the parking around the studio, I don't think that's formal parking. There's no parking lines, there's no parking delineated spaces as far as I know. So, you know, that people are choosing to park on that street.
Well, and that's
So,
where I think
okay.
that
So
if the
that
city
needs
engineer
to
got
be a discussion
involved,
with the city
he
engineer,
could,
yeah.
he could delineate
Right. I mean, is
where,
there,
you know, there again, safe sight lines, things
Exactly.
along those lines.
I mean, should there be parking if there's a? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, I just wanted to
I'm
state
just
that,
wondering,
you know,
like,
with
do we have other concerns on this street as the zoning board? I mean, is there?
No, but I mean, but I just wanted to say that, you know, regarding comments of people parking too close to intersections, there's no delineation for people, to show people where they're supposed to park.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right.
So there
Okay.
aren't those signs.
There's no sign, as far as I know, there may be signage on the, signage, I'm not sure, but in terms of on the road,
If there were
I don't
lines.
believe there are painted lines to show people where they're allowed to park and where they're not allowed to park. So that could be a comment that's made to DPW city engineer regarding if there's continual parking on this area, maybe there should be some lines.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Juliet, I don't know whether it's within your purview to address the issue of like curb cuts and locations of curb cuts, like whether that's something that you consider as part of your review, but if you had anything to add on to it, like respond to that, I would.
Absolutely. This is going to be hard to explain without, me drawing a picture. But I know that, concerned with the alignment of the property across the street. And this is, I heard someone from the audience say, it's close enough. And that's so kind of unprofessional way to say it, but it is close enough. A lot of times what we see as a bad alignment is if this driveway, which is basically directly across from the parking lot here, if it were, right here, and these two edges were really not in line, because then as your two drivers approaching each other from parking lots or side streets, there's no clear line of communication, and at that point there's no clear line of, okay, well, whose turn is it to go, because maybe you didn't see each other pull up. So to have it across from the driveway like this is exactly what we do look for. And if it had it been shifted, even 25 feet north, it would have been something that's like, all right, maybe we can work to shift this a little bit further south. But as far as the other, there's not a lot of curb cuts along the road. You've got a fair distance here even before you reach this intersection where there's no other curb cuts on this side of the street. And north, all you're seeing is some residential driveways on that side until you get to Princeton Avenue here. I was out there, I didn't flag these crosswalks as being an issue, but if it comes up when you're talking to the city engineer, I guess just to make sure there is adequate signage, to make sure people are stopping there. When you think about the number of vehicles that this site is anticipated to generate, on average, I think it was 19 in the morning, 24 in the afternoon, and that's per hour. So when you think about that, that's 20 vehicles every 60 minutes, which is about one vehicle every 3 minutes. It's, in retrospect, it's not a huge increase. Are you going to see an impact? Of course, you can never put in a development without seeing some amount of growth. But what we do is we look at the amount of impact. And in what we saw in our review and in the review of the applicant's study is that it's not a significant enough impact to take the adjacent intersections or the roadway and bump them up to the next level of service, to make it operate that much more poorly, if that makes sense. It's really not a significant impact. It's hard to define. I think sometimes it's easy to relate if you explain, one vehicle every 3 minutes. Not a constant flow of vehicles coming out of this development. The other way we like to look at it is the roadway, I think, currently carries, I think it was 3,100 vehicles a day. So when you look at the increase of about, it was 250, again, it's fairly negligent. So the roadway is, we thought it was wide enough to accommodate additional traffic. The speeds through the area are slow enough. There's adjacent stop signs, so no one's really using these roadways as cruising roads right on Parsons Avenue. So, I don't. I've never done it, but no. In all seriousness,
wheeling at night.
And I believe you, and you see that everywhere. Unfortunately, it's not something you can get away from. But as far as it's really not a horrible location for this type of development. And I don't really know what else to say.
I really appreciate
efforts
to explain. I found it very helpful. In terms of like what you looked at, like you were focusing on intersections. Did you consider at all like traffic calming like measures, like whether like, because there is some increase and like you said, it's not increment, like the increment is not enough to cause like there to be a need to elevate one of the intersection, like to redesign an intersection or elevate an intersection, but what about, like, is there?
It's hard standing here and here, like I didn't know these concerns before coming in, I didn't know what any existing concerns were. When we went out there, we kind of just went out there, and it's actually nice to get that third opinion, send someone out there who really is not biased in any way, and to look at the surrounding area. And do I think that, you know, I think any street, you know, can really be eligible for traffic calming techniques if that's what the city desires. But I think that the city needs to come up with, you know, a kind of a consistent approach, because if you start implementing these things in one neighborhood, you're going to have every other neighborhood in the city calling you. But do I think this development itself requires the need for traffic calming techniques on Parsons? No, I don't think so. I think, you know,
so the increment increase from this development, you don't think would put it over the threshold for traffic calming?
No.
No, I think the reality is that people are already using Parsons Street as a cutoff to avoid Main Street.
Right.
That's, and I think that, you know, given the construction that's on on Union Street right now, there's been a significant increase. So.
Did anybody else, behind you, there's somebody behind you, I'm sorry.
I can say this loud, I'd probably do the drive.
Yeah.
Is there any differentiation in apartments within the data, within the designation of apartment, for number of bedrooms in the apartments, and as well as percentage of occupancy or anything like that, or is it just one average for apartments and no other different definition?
They base it on the number of units, and what we saw for what's proposed in this particular application is there are some studio apartments, some 1 bedroom, some 2 bedroom, some 3 bedroom. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that's what is done across the board with. So to me, that tells me like it's going to average, you know. And for the counts that are conducted as part of the database, again, it's done at apartment complexes where they don't necessarily, you know, say you're going to use this rate for a 3 bedroom and this rate for a 1 bedroom. It's all averaged together.
That's what I said.
They count, like I said, hundreds of these, and then they average them all together to get the amount.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, if you want to come back up and give us one last comment on traffic.
Tony Swears, 50 Shoreline Drive, Ware, Mass. In consideration of the chairman's previous comments regarding the purview of the board, is there a point of even doing a baseline?
And existing conditions?
Yes.
There is, so that you
Okay.
can tell what, I don't think the city of Easthampton necessarily has it spelled out in their zoning regs, but a lot of times a city will spell out, you know, if an intersection experiences a decrease in level of service from when you compare existing conditions to build conditions, then, you know, the applicant's required to do mitigation, you know, or something along those lines. It can be more specific, but what each level of service represents, so I can kind of define it, because where am I getting this arbitrary level of service B or level of service C? What they represent is there's, you know, from 0 to 10 seconds of average vehicle delay experienced at an intersection represents a level of service A. If that were to decrease and go from 10 seconds to 20-second window, it's a level of service B. And that's the average delay experienced by a vehicle at an intersection. And I believe the level of service C is from 20 seconds to 35 seconds. So you really got to cross over a threshold that says, okay, you know, this intersection has added X seconds of delay to each vehicle that goes through the intersection and is therefore creating a worse level of service. So it's good to have the baseline, because you want to know how this roadway is operating today, because you need to compare it to something. You know, if I just told you it's going to operate as a D in the future, and that's great, but, well, turns out it's operating at a B now. It doesn't sound so great anymore, you know. But what they show, what the applicant showed, and we confirmed their analysis, it's using industry software that we use. The levels of service are not expected to decrease. So they're seeing the same level of service. So they're not crossing any threshold to be concerned with. You know, and the incremental delay is there, you know, I could go through and tell you at each approach to each intersection, you know, maybe there's a 1 second increase of delay. I'm not telling you it's staying the same, because you add traffic, it can't possibly stay the same. But maybe it was 1 or 2 seconds added to the incremental delay, but not enough to cross over that threshold to make it a worse level of service that we should be concerned about.
So just for the sake of argument, say you found that there was 1 million cars going through there a day. Would this project bother you?
Absolutely. 1 million's a lot.
No, I'm just saying, but there is a point where you're going to say this project bothers you.
There's absolutely a point. There's a lot of roadways in town that you honestly can't propose any side streets or any major driveways on anymore without installing a signal, just because you would not have sufficient gaps in the roadway streams to allow vehicles to exit safely.
Do you have like a round number where this project bothers you? On a data, background data?
I don't. We're given the simple facts of what we're dealing with here, and the ADT on Parsons Street is not high enough. The traffic generated by this site is not high enough. A lot of times what it comes down to, if an intersection is operating, very poorly, at that point you start looking, okay, what can be done to improve this? And if it's a stop-controlled intersection, you look at, maybe we need a signal. And you can't just say, let's slap a signal on there. Even the industry has standards. There's traffic signal warrant analyses that you have to perform, and the warrants are based on all kinds of data input in order to even meet the needs for a signal. And I can tell you that, I think the threshold for a side street exiting, and again, I wouldn't even consider a signal in this area, but I believe to even consider something as drastic as a signal, a side street has to have, I think, a minimum of 100 vehicles exiting during the peak hour. It's that drastic. I mean, this is a very minor development. But no, I do appreciate the neighborhood's concern, absolutely.
Traffic or other?
Well, it's traffic that I can wait on the other, but it's traffic that can segue into something else, but I will limit it to traffic.
Okay.
For right now.
Thank you.
My question is, your name and... Oh, Barbara Tillman, South Hadley, Mass. My mother's a resident on 13 Federal. I don't know if anyone has considered the amount of cars generated for the guests of this development. There were 76 parking places allotted. 4 were for guests.
I think that the industry number, as they've been described to us, that would all be factored in.
But where do they if someone has a birthday party, graduation,
where
do the it's
okay.
Traffic / parking, where do the cars park for any more than 4 guests? You have 38 units. Chances are there will be more than 4 guests at a given time. And there's only, the other problem, I think, for going to traffic is there's one exit. It's not a horseshoe, so at least it can be divided, but.
And that's a good question. Sometimes, splitting driveways, so you have 2 driveways, can be a good thing if you've got a very large development, because then you can send half the traffic over here, half the traffic over here, and maybe you won't trigger the need for a signal or any major improvements. But this is so small that I see the benefit of one driveway as being a good thing, as opposed to now you have 2 access points accessing onto Parsons Street and creating another curb cut. So I don't see the driveway as a concern. I agree with the one driveway. And as far as the parking stalls go, I believe my former colleague, Jean Christie, did the review of the site and the number of parking spaces versus the zoning requirements. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I did not look at the number of parking spaces required for guests.
They've asked for a waiver on that part, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I know that whatever it is, it's meeting zoning requirements, and that's.
Well, but there's no on-street parking on Parsons Street on the western side or the southern side of Everett.
Right, but if they're complying with zoning, then...
So they will be parking on Jane's, in other words, if someone has an overnight guest, and that's...
I think it's the same as if, it was several single families going in there, each of which had like a driveway with limited space.
Well,
I
no,
don't think
because
that's-
the parking would be, the guest parking would filter onto public street, and from November to April, you can't park on any street from midnight to 6 a.m. So where will the cars of the guests of this project go? I mean, that's a lot of,
Right, I appreciate your concern, but it's, I mean, to the extent that they're complying with zoning, it's again, a little bit, you know, like, what I tried to explain at the very outset of this process is this whole process is governed by state law, and it's very specific about what we can consider and what we can't consider. And, we're trying very hard to fully consider the things that we are allowed to consider, and we don't want to, risk tainting that process by considering things that we're not allowed to consider. And to the extent that they are within zoning on a matter and they haven't asked for a waiver from us,
well,
it becomes a little beyond, so.
I understand, but if the people, when the apartment dwellers do,
I mean, to the
will
extent
they
that
be
they're
told
illegally
that
parking, then it's a,
Then it becomes a public.
right, it's a public hazard, you call public safety.
and so they get their cars towed?
Right, I mean,
So
that's.
Just
yeah.
like anybody else who lives in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Or,
Well, but other people in the neighborhood, they usually have driveways, and you can have,
Right, but I guess
there
what
are
I'm saying
places
though
to
is to the
park.
extent that people are parking illegally, like, they're parking illegally, like, call the public safety, get them towed. And if people don't want to live in these apartments because they feel like there's not enough parking in the neighborhood, then
And they move.
Then, I mean, that's, there's trade-offs everywhere you live. If you live on Loudville Road, you don't really have parking when you have a big party. Like, that's, life is imperfect. But, the parking spaces is within what the zoning is, so it falls beyond, like, it falls beyond what we're able to consider for that. To the extent that zoning seems inadequate, you got to go above our pay grade, because we don't control the zoning. We just, our only role as the ZBA is to try to make enforcement as consistent as we can. So.
The police probably won't be happy, because they'll probably be getting tons of calls, so.
Well, and it's,
And the people on Jane's and the
like, I don't have
historic
anything to tell you
cemetery.
because it's just not something that we're able to
I
consider,
understand,
so.
but it will be a problem, and unfortunately, there's a historic cemetery that is probably the only free space that's not in front of someone's house. And I granted
and the
that's
cemetery was
histo-
not concerned with, we did hear actually from the Historic Commission regarding the cemetery, but that wasn't a concern. But, I wish I could, wave a magic wand and tell you that this was something we could consider and here's the solution, but
In the
it doesn't seem
feasibility
like there's a
letter,
solution.
too, the people who did the feasibility letter did state that they had an issue with the cemetery.
Which,
The I have it.
letter?
Yeah.
From the,
Yeah, in the applicant's,
anybody else? Oh, in the
market study, that's the only thing I could think of. The project feasibility market study? Is that what you're referring to, the
Yeah.
market study in the back of the
Yep.
application?
yeah. It did say that the cemetery abutting the subject site was a matter for their concern. Also, that the longer than typical distance from family-oriented public services
but
and
again, that's,
moderate traffic passed the subject throughout the day. So they had those were their three concerns, although they,
I think we're gonna move on now though, because I want to make sure that we have time to have some neighbor responses regarding like positive suggestions, because I had specifically asked for that, and if there is time at the end, we'll open it up for other issues, or actually not.
there
quite at the
really
end, but-
still are some pretty unanswered questions, I think, as far as everyone in the neighborhood is concerned.
Right. So if people have positive
You want to take your comments first?
comments, we want the
You want positive first? and
because I
then-
specifically asked for those, and I want to give people an opportunity if they, have things. And then if there's, where we are with time, we'll open it up a little bit more broadly. And then I do want to have a little bit of time at the end for us to discuss and see where we are at. So, positive?
I believe it's positive, yes.
Excellent.
You might not.
Come on up. Well, you know, that's the risk we take, right? Like, if I ask
It's all a
you,
perspective.
Yeah.
When we're talking about water, Doug Meets Wacky, 18 Federal Street.
Thank you.
When we're talking about water and being sure it's clean, I consider this a very positive comment, that we should have the DEP, just as we did last year with the porous pavement, that we should have them look at this project.
I think
You have my you have my notes on this?
Yeah.
And let's find out, because according to my calculations, as well as Berkshire's calculations, there's 16 or 17% of the TSS, the total suspended solids, going into the ground, to the dirt above the aquifer, and this needs to be looked at.
Well, I mean, I think that's what
That's what
BAPAC looks
BPAC
like.
Yeah.
Looks at. I mean, I don't.
Well, that's BAPAC. I'm talking about the DEP. Those are
Right.
different. Those are different bodies.
Right,
BAPAC
no,
has no
it's true.
power. They
Right.
just they just
Right.
they can only
No, no, no.
give their opinion. The DEP is the one who
We
said.
can certainly ask DEP.
It would be
if
really
they have-
important-
I mean, we have. Wait, didn't we have comments from DEP?
We had it on porous pavement where they nixed porous pavement
Right.
when the Berkshire said this is the best thing going ecologically and environmentally, and the DEP turned around and said no, you shouldn't. And while the Berkshire said that it was the best stuff around and it was better than alternative traditional pavement, they turned out to be quite wrong.
Right. No.
I don't think there is a comment from DEP on this one. I don't recall it
Okay.
in the comment packets, but
Okay.
maybe misremembering. Would you?
Yeah, we can certainly
Is that
ask
something
DEP
you'd like?
for. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And would you pass along the comments that I've given you on these 2 pages to the DEP as well? Because those are our
sure.
concerns.
Okay.
This is pollution that only will accumulate over years and it will not go away.
Yeah.
So we should positively deal with this.
I mean,
I'm not being sarcastic. I mean, in a positive way, we should be very prudent.
right. I mean, you know, we can. Again, we are constrained by what the current regulations and zoning are, but
Right.
I think asking DEP to review it in respect to what their requirements are and what their concerns are is
Right.
something we certainly can do. And
They should know that the Rinker Corporation, who I corresponded with a couple times, said that given the area of concern is in a Zone 2 aquifer,
Right.
I would proceed cautiously with a direct discharge into the ground, and that's from the engineer from Rinker.
Right.
And I have other quotes there that you have. I know you do.
You went on at length last time.
I did. This is new information. This is
Well,
all
and
new.
thank you for communicating that.
Right.
because-
But, you know, I think,
I'll take care of it.
having the DEP look at it is totally reasonable and we can get that done.
Okay,
So.
great.
I'm not the school teacher. Just come on up and just take your turn.
You're the chairperson.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify on the DEP request, you want them just only looking at the stormwater?
No, I mean,
Or you
if-
want-
to the extent that they haven't re-looked at the plan, it would be
Okay,
nice
so
to
the whole
just.
thing.
Mhm.
Okay.
But, you know, with a specific emphasis on,
Site
you
plan
know,
review.
yeah,
Specific emphasis on aquifer?
yeah.
Stormwater and all.
Because DEP is a very big place, and so there's gonna be different people who specialize in different things. So I just wanna
Okay.
make sure I'm sending it to the right person and
Right.
getting exactly what you want. So
Okay.
aquifer and stormwater? Okay.
Although I guess there is also this question about sewer and water pressure, which I guess would also be DEP.
Sewer and water pressure
No.
is gonna be,
That's in city.
that's city.
That's city.
City.
I can check with
Wait.
Jim.
Oh, right, not DE, I'm sorry, I don't mean I'm sorry.
You're thinking
I'm-
DPW.
Yes, I was totally.
Wrong
thinking
acronym,
DPW.
wrong
Sorry
alphabet
about
soup.
that.
DPW?
That's why I was like, don't we have comments from DP? Yes, I was getting DPW and DEP confused, my apologies.
So you wanna know if
So-
there's water and
so
sewer
DEP
capacity?
So DEP, I'm only concerned, I guess, about the.
The aquifer and the stormwater.
Right, correct.
But you want me to check with DPW regarding sewer infrastructure?
Yeah, because there was an
Yeah,
issue
there was a
about.
concern about sewer
sewer
infrastructure and water
and
pressure.
water-
And water pressure. Sewer infrastructure? Okay. I'll check with Jim Gracia.
Thanks. Sorry, thank you.
Kirsten Morrow, 12 Federal Street. So if I understand what your question was, you would like to hear what would make this project better for me?
Like, if there are
An
ideas for ways
improvement.
that it can better integrate into the neighborhood.
Okay. Well,
Obviously that we're limited in what we can actually consider, but it just seemed like, I don't know, maybe there's something that nobody has thought of that, I don't know.
Okay, so I live at 12 Federal Street, which is the Boylston Company housing. According to the CDC's density ratios or units per acre, my area of my street and surrounding area, we are between 13 to 16 units per acre, which is extremely dense. And their project, they're proposing 8.7 units per acre because they have a larger parcel. And on its face, that sounds great. It's on its face in keeping with the single-family homes around it. However, I was really thinking about that today when I was thinking about my house in relation to the street. My house is about 12 to 15 feet off the street, which is exactly what they're proposing for that front unit. I think the back of my house is probably 40 feet from my neighbors to the back, and it is 2 driveways, single, so basically 2 car widths from the house immediately to the left and to the right. So it's extremely dense. And I thought, well, one of the issues that we've had with this project is the density, except when you take it by the numbers, it doesn't really fit. And then I realized the reason that it doesn't really fit is because they've placed all of the houses along the outside edge, leaving all of the open space, parking areas, walkways, etc., in the center. And as a result, they're also asking for a waiver for the amount of space that they have between the building and the property line.
Mm-hmm.
So that right there, by asking for that waiver and by designing it the way that they have, they've actually recreated the density that I live with every day. And the density that I live with is really not ideal for myself or my neighbors, but we knew what it was when we moved in. And if we could change it, we all would. I can hear my neighbor behind me. So what I'm saying.
We have limited time. So what's your suggestion?
Well, my suggestion is that they pull it. Why are the houses not in the middle?
Oh, I asked that.
Okay, maybe I missed it, but
no, because I had a similar. I had a similar thought. Like maybe the open space should be more on the outside. And the answers that we were given. There might be more, and these were just the ones that stuck with me. And feel free to chime in. But
site visit.
Yeah, were the passive solar considerations for the buildings, and then the other thing that was pointed out to me was because of the shape of the site, if things were clustered more, it would mean that the roadway would have to be on the outside, and then instead of being sort of having the neighbors buffered by the buildings, there would be like cars going by all the time right near the neighbors, and that didn't really seem like to me to be any.
Well, except that we heard tonight that there's really not going to be that much traffic, so by bringing the buildings in, it might be a better option for the neighbors to be buffered by the roadway.
Your preference would be.
That would be my preference. I would prefer to have a road behind me than have to, I don't mind, my neighbors are great. But it's kind of embarrassing when you're listening to the guy, diagonally across from you berate his daughter for something that she's done, or, this is the stuff that we hear everything.
Yeah,
I'm not kidding.
I gotta tell you, I live, houses are much further apart, like, noises carry, like, I still hear stuff from, like, that you wouldn't like, I used to live in Northampton where the density was very similar to your neighborhood, and I thought it would be so much quieter when I moved to where I was, where it's less dense, and I gotta tell you, I still hear, like, the bicyclists as they bike by on the road, and I hear the walkers as they walk, and I hear the kids down the street when they're out playing, and I hear the person way over in the woods when they put their music on. So, I don't know, like,
Well, I still feel that it would be my preference to be buffered by a road, you know, which would also allow for more, probably, you know, a better tree belt, and then the road. You know, with
I
all
know
the
that there'd be room
trees
for
and
that, because of the shape of the site, but,
Do you want the applicant to respond?
yeah, do you have, I mean, because you had sort of addressed the issue in a way that caused me to completely, you know,
Sure.
because I had the same concern. Sure,
Yeah.
yes, please.
Mark Sternick, Dietz and Company Architects. We looked at 9 or maybe 12 different possible configurations for the whole development, and really looking at taking a road around the entire very zigzaggy perimeter of this. Not only would this end up being mostly asphalt without a tree belt between our primary concern was to try and give as much of a buffer between the surrounding neighbors and the buildings. Right now, we have some kind of tree belt or green buffer everywhere around our buildings. And so we have probably to the property line 30 feet. It varies, but at least 30 feet. And if, as you can see from the aerial photo, just about everybody whose home backs up to the site, just about everyone's home is at least another 30 or 40 feet away from that back property line. So really from home to home, in terms of the neighbors, you're talking about a minimum of 60 feet between units. We're also looking at trying to do very high performance green units, which a secondary byproduct of which is the walls and the windows are super insulated, and you don't have, well, you can open the windows in the summertime and still hear just as well, but when the windows are closed, the housing is going to be quieter.
Totally false. Totally false.
Excuse me?
Totally false.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, let's not have responses just willy-nilly from the audience, please. Okay.
Well, anyway, but I would still like to see the units on the inside. I think having a house built right in your backyard, and that's a lot of what this feels like right now, and I feel like if the units were pulled into the middle, I feel like it would be a little less intrusive.
Thank you for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on.
Joel Tillman, in response to your request for positive comments, there's an 800-pound gorilla in the room that I don't think anybody's recognizing, and that is that the neighbors are here because they don't want this project. They're frightened that it's going to completely alter their lives. People have lived here all their lives. So for them to come up with a positive comment is like asking the hangman, asking the victim, what's a better knot we can tie? It doesn't make sense, and I don't think you're going to get any of that. So I have well, you know, we've gone through all of these, over the months that we've been here, we've gone through, I can't count the number of reasons that people will say this is it's a beautiful project, the development is beautiful, but it's in the wrong place. And for Julia to say that she's not here, sorry, that a 38-unit complex is small, maybe for the Bronx it's small, but for Easthampton, in that neighborhood, it's huge. No, really. So anyway, let me get to the point. Why I'm here is something that we know that in order to defeat this, there has to be a valid reason. You have to have something, either health, safety, or a massive violation of zoning laws. The only thing that I see, after having sat here for all this time, is that the underlying aquifer is really at risk with this project. And you have to realize, first of all,
Wait, stop.
What?
I
I went through all this trouble. It'll only take me 5 minutes.
Is this going somewhere positive? Like what I meant by positive, no, here's what I meant by positive was like a suggestion for a change, because we can ask the applicant to make certain types of changes. Like that's part of what this process is.
It's in here.
So if it's a specific change.
It's in here.
Okay, then
Okay.
can we get to that? Because we're
Okay,
just running out
okay.
of time, and people have
Okay.
asked to have time to make other points, and I
Okay.
would like to be
I
able
drove
to have
to a
there be
local,
time.
I drove to a local strip mall, got out of the car and took photographs of